Good evening, and thanks for staying with Radio Now, 95.3 FM, Lagos. It's now 5 o'clock, and you're welcome to The Big Story. My name's Cameron Apollo. From protectors to predators, the dark side of vigilantism in Nigeria. That's our conversation this afternoon, from protectors to predators. Now, Nigeria's insufficient security coverage over the years has seen many communities take certain measures in a quest for safety, in a quest to protect themselves. This situation has given rise to numerous non-state actors, non-state groups, popular among which are the vigilantes over time and across the land. Now, these groups may have been created to address our security concerns, our security challenges, but some of them have turned out to be laws unto themselves by terrorizing communities and neighboring communities as well. So the question is, how did this happen? How does the protector become a predator? How did this happen, and what can we do about it? Now, joining me for the discussion this evening on A Big Story, I have Mr. Joshua Biem. He's a policy research analyst at Next Year SPD. Mr. Biem, good evening, and thank you for joining us on A Big Story.
Hi, Mr. Kamri. Thanks for having me. I'm Joshua Biem, a policy research analyst at Next Year. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. And also joining us is a security analyst, Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Adekoya. Good evening to you as well.
Yeah, good evening, Joshua. Thank you for having me. Good evening to the listeners.
Okay. And so let's get straight into it. I suppose let me go straight to the author of this report, Joshua. Let's start from the top. We're talking about vigilantes and how they turn from protectors to predators. That's what your report is all about. So let's go back to the beginning. Have we always had vigilante groups in Nigeria? What are vigilantes, and have we always had them? Is it just a recent thing? Mr. Biem.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kamri, for the question. So first of all, I'd like to explain what we mean by a vigilante. So a vigilante now, in simple terms, is a person or group of people who try in an official way to prevent crime or to catch and punish someone who has committed a crime, especially because they do not think that official organizations such as the police are not controlling crime effectively. So in the Nigerian scene or the Nigerian setting now, we've had this vacuum where, in as much as our security agencies have done to a great extent, have put in efforts to actually curb security, but we still have reports of insecurity, kidnapping, banditry, and all of this. So who feels this vacuum that is left behind from these inadequacies, rather? So vigilantes are actually the next thing that people or the citizens or residents turn to in time of need. But however, we've seen this transition over the years that they are undergoing a troubling transformation, if I could say that, into cult-like gangs, exacerbating existing dangers rather than mitigating them. So first of all, we could actually see that, okay, the roots of vigilantism from the Bakassi boys back then, when they were actually there to initially curb crime, but they later became notorious for abuses like extrajudicial killings and political targeting. And this was in the southern part of that. But then in the Yan Sakai in the north now, they actually see them committing serious human rights violations. So when you see the people meant to protect you, or the barrier between you and danger becoming what you fear, it's the bone of contention here, where you actually see this vicious cycle where who do you now turn to in time of need? So these groups are becoming a lot more violent over the years, and it's a bit worrying, and that's the whole idea of the article.
Okay, we'll come back to you. You've touched on another very, very important aspect of the conversation there. Let's come now to Mr. Onyekachi. Please talk to us about the working relationship between groups like vigilante groups and state actors like the police and military and so on and so forth. How has that been over the years? Has it been harmonious? Has it been challenging? Talk to us about that.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the question. So if you go by the definition of vigilantes, I think that there's a problem in nomenclature here. Yes, whilst we've had cases of community militias, individuals taking it upon themselves to ensure law enforcement, where the real law enforcement are lacking, those are types of vigilantes. I think what we are trying to address here are community-based efforts at addressing issues of insecurity, what you may want to consider as local initiatives. So, case in point, Bakassi Boys, Amoteco, those of us in licensed private security companies, we consider these people as non-licensed, non-regulated operators that don't fall under any guidelines. In terms of the history of their usefulness in Nigeria, it's not been all the while bad. There are some good sides to the local civilian-led efforts. If you look at the civilian JTF in the Northeast, of course, the military themselves, we acknowledge that without the CJTF, at the least, the issues of insurgency in the Northeast perhaps will have taken more lives and taken more time. So that's on the one hand. In some parts of the Northwest, you have the community members themselves running towards Ansaru for cover from armed bandits themselves. And in some communities, the bandits act as ethnic militias or vigilante groups. And then, of course, that breeds some form of lawlessness. I think that's what the author of the book is alluding to. So again, if we class the problem properly, if you do a proper definition of problem, then we can begin to look at how best to define what the problem is.
Okay, talking about proper classification, let me come back now to Mr. Biem. Vigilante justice. This is an area, going through your reports, I'll be honest with you, I find myself asking one question. What happens that makes these vigilante groups start to act as, authorities of law and order unto themselves? What are the dynamics involved in changing from a protector to becoming protector, enforcer, judge, jury, executioner, all in one, which some of them have done in the past? How does that happen?
Well, thank you very much for that question. So, when we look at the vigilantes now, they've been given when you turn to them as your recourse in time of need, that we don't have that binding agreement or a structure that regulates their activities. So there's a tendency that when you give a group of people that level of power, that, okay, you can actually go ahead and pursue crime and bring people to justice, there's a tendency that, okay, there's this leaning towards pursuing some other agendas. And you wouldn't say that these things actually occur out of a vacuum. And some certain things catalyze the exploitation, or this vigilantes going out of their way to get into these activities. So first of all, there's this distrust of police that has created a situation where we have more vigilantes and all of that. But when you think of a prevalence of small arms with the vigilantes, and basically a lack of adequate regulation, as I earlier said, when you think of this, and there's an increasing level of poverty, socioeconomic situations that actually lead these people into engaging in other activities, because I have arms now as a vigilante member. So why won't I actually go out of my way to solve some of my other issues? So these people look at it, and the approach they take in this situation now is actually criminal. So if you have arms and there's no one monitoring you, there's this tendency that you actually lean into and get involved in what would otherwise be negative. So, and that is what we're seeing.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Biem. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Another aspect I'd like us to touch on is what you call the cultification of these vigilante groups. They start to form cults, then they move into, into gang sort of rivalry, into group rivalries, and so on and so forth. What leads to that? How does a person shift from I'm going to be your eyes and ears when you sleep, and I will do my best to protect you from harm? How do I move from that to being someone who is possibly a political gun or thug for hire, or someone who will go about carrying out extrajudicial killings? How does that journey happen?
So when you think of it, from the article, if you actually have an in-depth look in the article, you'd actually see that a lot of times what the whole idea of the occultic groups, they have the oath, they have the weapons, they're actually going all out to actually push out an agenda or try to get a certain agenda. So as a vigilante group now, you have access to the weapons. You're tasked with promoting people, promoting the protection of people and all of that. But then when you get into some socioeconomic situations, let's say poverty, trying to meet your needs and all of that. Not exactly that's exclusively what is driving these people, but that's a major
one of the
factor.
factors.
Yes, it's one of the factors. So when you think of it and look at it in that perspective, and when you think, okay, a vigilante, we have this group, this person actually has the same ideology as me. So why don't we band together and get this thing done? We have a recognition that this is us. So it's the identification that, yes, we are this group and we can actually do this to actually better ourselves. So we actually see this, and there's no one putting them in check. So that is a key thing. And if you look at the recommendations, there's one of the key recommendations, there is a need to regulate this vigilante group. So if there's a regulatory body that would actually stop these groups from deviating from their purpose, their direct purpose to actually seek their personal or other needs or fortification or seem tendency to lean in towards what we can see as a cult, it would actually be a better thing. Like it would be a great thing to actually put them in check. Yes.
All right, now talking about putting them in check, let me come back to Mr. Adekoya. The authorities, where are the authorities when these groups, the NSAK, the Bakassi boys and so on and so forth, when they're going about committing their own criminal acts? Where are the authorities in all of this?
Again, I think not to over-dramatize Nigeria's problem. If you say the authorities, I assume you mean law enforcement. But we've also seen cases of allegations against law enforcement officers themselves, whether it be in gun running, in kidnapping, in some of these other vices that I think we are complaining about. If you then say, where's the government that's supposed to be regulating? I mean, the case of sharing of 400 billion is before the National Assembly. Cases of allegations of mismanagement levied against members of the executive of the federal government. So I think that we may perhaps be over-dramatizing a societal problem. Doesn't mean it's good, but hey, it's an all of society problem. So when you give a man a gun, and then you pay him 20,000 naira every month, as an example, and then you call him maybe Amotekun, not saying that that's what Amotekun is paid, but maybe you should also do your research and let us know how much they are being paid. So you give a man who has a family of 4, 20,000, he has house rent to pay, he has to transport to work every day, he needs to cover medical insurance, life insurance, pay his bills, light bills, and the rest on 20,000 salary. And then we wonder why they don't tend or lead to vices. I think the issues of cultism are also societal. Doesn't now mean that this is limited to only vigilantes or local state subnational based initiative. Remember that at the subnational level, outfits like Lagos State's Neighborhood Watch, Aboteko, Ebubago, they are creations of law, howbeit at the subnational level. So some of them have some of the regulations that they need. Even the federal forces, the police, the DSS, the EFCC, ICPC, Immigrations, Customs, they have laws, governing laws that regulates the activity. It doesn't yet stop us from getting cases of some few bad eggs amongst them. So I think that on a balance of events, I would say that the use of these local-based community initiatives would not give us a net outlook or net impact if we do it to access. Are there areas of improvement? Are there gaps? Yes. I think that the gaps that exist are gaps created by society. You don't harm a man. There's a video we saw of a soldier claiming that he needed to see his family. The ticket cost, just going by road, cost to and fro 70,000. He's being paid 50,000. He has an AK-47 double magazine, and he's saying, "Hey, how can he go and see?"
He can't afford to.
That I by the society. So that's my feedback to some of these things, please.
Okay. Difficult situation there. Now,
Yeah, just
yes, go on.
Just in addition to what Mr. Adekoya said, well, there's another issue. Like, I believe to a great extent, if the government, and I mean to say that the government has actually done a lot. We've seen reasonable grounds in terms of tackling security, but there's more to be done. But the idea or issue of vigilantism is coming up as a vacuum. It's actually filling up that vacuum that the federal government has actually created. So I believe if the federal government could do more, or the government rather, could step up to fill in that vacuum that the vigilantes actually have to do, it would actually go a long way to reduce or put some check to the protectors turning to predators, as the article title has actually highlights. Yes.
Okay, so let's look to some of the solutions you've penned down here. Now, you talked about regulation a couple of times. The cycle of violence that emerges from these groups, especially when they start to operate like cults, when they are weaponized for politics, when they start to take the law in and of themselves. Some of the issues you've listed here include things like poverty, social exclusion, and so on and so forth. In a broad term, you're talking about good governance, aren't you? You know, we need to improve the quality of governance and give people better chances in the hopes of breaking the number of people who would join up and turn to bad eggs, so to speak. Those are two. Now, community engagement is an interesting one. Talk to us a bit more about community engagement, Mr. Biem. You say community engagement, it's crucial. The groups must be subject to oversight and rigorous regulation by, you know, their communities. How would that work, especially when they are holding, you know, this power, if you will, over the communities they terrorize? How does that work?
Thank you for that, Mr. Camry. So first of all, I'd like to start by saying that when you think of this problem of vigilantes turning from protectors to predators, you'd actually see that the operations of vigilantes is actually at the local level. Let's just put it at that, first of all. So when you actually want to address a problem that is closer to the people, who's the first person you get to meet? The local administration. Like, I believe that the local administration now has the first mandate of holding, even if there's some framework that's supposed to be created, you cannot put out or neglect the importance of the local administration, be it local leaders, religious leaders, or all of that at that local level, because they are really closer to the people that need the protection, and they're closer to the vigilantes. So when you actually have them have that level of accountability that, oh, okay, we actually need to do something about this vigilantes. How are we actually going to, who are the people part of these vigilantes? Is there a record? Are there records of who are part of these? What are your functions? Like, we actually need to have some accountability to the vigilantism in these communities, and it goes enlightenment, basically all the nitty-gritties at the local level. They actually play a key part. That comes first before any state or federal government or any other initiative could come in, because they are closer to the people. That's the emphasis.
Okay. Mr. Adekoya, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it's a self-reinforcing problem. Once you get to that point, when you say the community, the police, for example, are people, citizens from the community who have been entrusted with the power of the collective to, of course, address the issue of crime and deal with issues like this. So if you say the community, yes, I agree. The police, law enforcement represents the collective power of attorney of the people entrusted in them to address these issues. But again, sometimes the problem we have are political. Again, they are structural. And yes, it involves the community. But when the design is bottom up, you have a more sustainable approach to security. To wit, that the communities in this time, I would say, the civilians within the communities who are not armed, except, of course, maybe you see religious leaders, community leaders, people who have influence in the society, perhaps they can intervene through moral suasion.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Adekoya. What about, like, now you're talking about breaking down the communities, traditional institutions. I always have a case to make for traditional institutions, and I ask the question, are we utilizing them to their fullest potential, the traditional institutions, especially in things like this? How effective are they?
As is now, as is, and based on the current setup of law, they are irrelevant. With profound respect to even the Oni of Ife, you will be surprised that by law, the local government chairman doesn't even have to reckon with him. Chieftaincy, issue of chieftaincy, kingship, customs are most times placed under a head of department in the local government. So by law, really, by law. Again, it's not something aside today. It's a systemic problem that, of course, we acquired based on the principles of divide and rule, the indirect rule system of the colonial era. Again, the problems the author talks about are problems created by a number of dysfunctionalities created during the colonial eras that we have held on to. What we need as a society is to completely rework, for the first time, something that fits our own purpose and design and needs and fosters the aspiration of the Nigerian citizen, not a police or security structure that was either set up for regime protection or for ring fencing of the slave trade or for protecting the interests of the new colonials or the colonials as it were at the time. So again, I don't like describing or discussing symptoms because the vigilantes, the community, the problem with them are all symptomatic of a deep-seated structural problem with how we do policing in Nigeria. We don't have state policing. The federal government would always lack nuance when it comes to basic community issues. So you have at the subnational level a case where the subnationals can make law, they can adjudicate law, but they cannot enforce it.
Right. I think that last part, when you talk about difference between symptoms and root causes, I do agree with you. We shouldn't dwell too much on symptoms. Symptoms should be pointers towards the deep-rooted cause of problems. That brings us to, I think, the final recommendation by Mr. Biem was about having to do away. Mr. Biem, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, just in addition, okay, Mr. Adekoya, you made mention of the irrelevance of the traditional institutions, but I wouldn't completely say they're irrelevant. I would rather say they're not doing enough. They're not doing enough because to a great extent, the respect and the adulation that comes with the whole traditional institutions, you can actually say that when it comes to these groups, you can always say that they have a say. Like you could actually say, like, put a stop to this. Who's responsible for this? And you can actually fish out the bad eggs. They're not doing enough. So there's emphasis on these traditional institutions doing more, but be saying they're irrelevant would not completely speaking be true. And speaking of state policing, it's still part of the issue where you actually have to have a system where a group of the policing has to be part of a system where people who know the state or know the intricacies of a state. So we at Next Year, we've had a one or two dialogues, and we've had a few workshops on state policing. If yes, how? You could actually look up on our website, and we could always share that. And it dives into the idea or the necessity or how looking at the balance between
Sorry
state
to
policing and
interrupt.
the
Sorry to
advantages of
interrupt
that.
you. Sorry to interrupt you,
Yes.
Mr. Biem. We're going to have a conversation about state policing because some of the concerns places. I come from a state that has many ethnic groups. I come from Adamawa. There are lots of ethnic groups there, and there are lots of us in the minorities. And the fear is when you create a state police, then the dominant ethnic groups in those states would wield that power and further oppress the ethnic minorities. So we understand the need to decentralize policing, but to break it down to the state level, maybe we might, should we be talking about regional policing instead of state policing, which gives a more wider spread of that power? But that's a conversation for another day. Think about that, Mr. Biem. We'll be knocking on your door. But Mr. Adekoya, let's come back to you, Mr. Adekoya. I think he's rounded it up beautifully by saying, look, root causes is the state needs to get its system up and running. But therein again lies the problem. Mr. Adekoya, it sounds like a catch-22 situation where we have all the challenges with policing that you've mentioned, but the challenges with that policing has given rise to what we're talking about now, vigilantism, which has itself become a problem. What's the way forward? In your closing remark, please, we have just a minute, Mr. Adekoya.
Yeah, sorry, I can't give a way forward in a minute because the problem is a wicked problem. It's a hydra-headed problem. Will require a complex set of approaches because you cannot divorce macroeconomics, geopolitics, this whole ethnic minority concerns, and the centrifugal way we play politics in Nigeria. So no quick fix. I reckon the problems we have will be there for the next 10 to 15 years. Only if we begin to address them, they will be there for the next 10 to 15 years. But I don't see any sign of seriousness on the part of the political class. What I see is a system that seeks to continue the rent-seeking, holding on to parochial nuances and structures that have failed completely. Nigeria of 2024 is not the Nigeria of 1960. So any president, commander-in-chief who thinks that they can sit down in Abuja and completely and overwhelmingly ensure full internal security in Nigeria is either ignorant or is being lied to or has subscribed to a lie himself. So herein lies the core of our problem, lack of local bottom-up approach to security. That's my final thoughts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Adekoya. And 30 seconds, please, Mr. Biem.
All right. Yeah. Well, the vigilantism problem, I think it's something, as Mr. Adekoya actually said, it's a complex web of issues ongoing. So I believe if we're actually able to solve the socioeconomic problems, from our traditional institutions or leaders actually step up to be like, okay, if these vigilantes are existent, or we can actually hold them accountable, there should be a framework guiding these groups from the transition we're seeing from being the protector to a predator. So if there's some level of accountability, we could always see that, okay, they would be able to fill in the vacuum that has been left from the security outfits. And if the security outfits are actually able to cover that vacuum, we won't even have the need for vigilantism. So the federal government has the responsibility to a great extent, or the governments in general have the responsibility to step up the need to actually secure these areas and look at the loopholes or the areas that need attention. And the whole idea of vigilantism or protectors turn into predators would not be something we would hammer on. And I still believe that it's not a one-time thing. It takes time. And if we actually put in the steps one at a time, we could actually achieve that level of trust and protection that we need in Nigeria with security we see. Yes.
Right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Mr. Joshua Biem, he's a policy research analyst at Next Year SPD, and Mr. Onyekachi Adekoya, security analyst. Thank you both so much for joining us on The Big Story this evening.